My name's Oliver Heath. I'm an architectural and interior designer. I run a design practice down in Brighton where we act as lead designers, but also consultants. We run a research department as well where we collate and collect information and data all about health and well-being and this new subject area that you may have heard about, which is biophilic design. We work on a variety of building typologies from education to healthcare to hospitality and domestic design. And today I'd like to ask you what nature can teach us about sound design. Because, believe it or not, and I think very often we forget it, that we are, as human beings, part of the natural environment. We're not above it, we're not separate to it, we're not masters of it. We rely on its health for our own health and well-being. And acoustics, of course, play a big role in that. So, what's the contemporary problem? Well, we live in dense, urban, geometric cities full of noise, activity, and people. In fact, 90% of the UK now lives in urban areas. We spend 90% of our lives indoors. So, of course, the spaces that we surround ourselves in are going to have a deep impact on our mental, physical, and emotional states. Added to that, we have very high rates of technology in our lives. 96% of 16 to 34-year-olds now owns a smartphone. Probably most of you do. These things are enormously addictive. And of course, stress is a big issue. It's endemic in our modern day lives. A study by the Health and Safety Executive that comes out every year stated that in the years 2017 to 18, stress accounted for 44% of all work-related ill health and 57% of all working days lost. And you know what? This is not what we were designed for or evolved as human beings. Our modern day lives are full of stresses. We are always on. There's a constant level of stress bombarding us with noise and activity. We generally have very poor zoning, either in our cities, but also in the open plan spaces that we find ourselves in. We find ourselves amidst an enormous amount of acoustic pollution, whether that's voices, technology, traffic, or building work. And we have that massive level of technology. And we are, as some people are saying, the distracted generation. And in fact, as research shows us, even having an unread text message can reduce our IQ by 10 points. And a 2005 study found that US workers were losing 2.1 hours every day due to distraction. So with these urban environments in mind, we as a society have developed technological solutions to deal with this noise, as we call it, which have perhaps become rather confused with how people perceive sound. These solutions are without doubt the bedrock of how we then allow other acoustic conditions to happen. But as a whole, we now build more solidly. We seal up our buildings. We add acoustic absorbing materials to reduce noise transmission. We mask noise with more technology, such as white noise, inspired by the hum of mechanical ventilation systems, which, as research shows, can actually be as damaging as not having it at all. But ultimately, for many, the aim is silence. But perhaps that's not how or where we came from. You know, we evolved in very different sorts of environments. And in fact, for 99.5% of human evolution, we've existed in very close connection to nature, a healthy form of nature, which has provided us with a rich multi-stimuli and sensory environment where our senses informed our choices. Choices, as we've already heard, which might inform or literally be the difference between life and death situations. In fact, our connection to that environment has left us with what is called a genetic inheritance, one which is very neatly described by this idea called the savanna theory, that suggests that when we find ourselves in these rich multisensory environments with a pointer prospect, these environments actually have the ability to reduce heart rate levels, to reduce blood pressure levels, to help us to recuperate from intense periods of activity and intense stressors. And I think the point of biophilic design is how we learn from these lessons and bring them into these dense, urban, geometric, hectic cities that we now find ourselves in. And when we talk about evolution, the subject of psychoacoustic pops up. Now, psychoacoustics is the science of how humans perceive sound, based on sound spectrum, volume, and also the meaning of sound. It includes noise, sound, and music. And of course, we know that noise and sound affects us all physiologically and psychologically, and this can be beneficial, but perhaps more often than not, it's detrimental, affecting our well-being, our cognitive focus, our concentration, and productivity. So it's no surprise that unwanted noise is one of the top concerns in the workplace satisfaction. The crux of the matter is that term noise, and it's a subjective one based on a range of different factors, including the tasks that you're performing, the context, the perceived control of that noise, and also personality, roughly falling into introvert and extrovert tendencies. So this dovetails very nicely into our approach to human-centered design, incorporating well-being, and in particular, biophilia and biophilic design. So biophilia quite literally means a love of nature, and it's how it explains our innate desire and attraction to be in and around natural forms and natural processes. So biophilic design, as a result, is a set of processes that we can bring into buildings to help us to reduce stress and to aid recuperation from intense periods of activity. It combines three different aspects. One is about how we bring real forms of nature into spaces, including plants, trees, water, natural light, fresh air, and subtle changes throughout the year. Another is the indirect connection to nature, how we mimic and evoke a feeling of nature. And the third is what we call the human spatial response. This image is from a project we completed at the Interface Showroom a couple of years back. It incorporates two water walls. And this being a subterranean space did something really interesting. We, of course, incorporated lots of biophilic materials and plants and greenery, but these water walls really probably transformed the space more than anything. They brought in, of course, the acoustic quality of the water cascading down the walls, the visual quality, and also a change in humidity and temperature. And what we found was this transformed this space from being in a forgotten corner of the lower ground floor of the showroom into somewhere where people started to congregate, but also go to when they wanted a quiet, restorative moment. So for me, this idea of how we mimic and evoke a feeling in nature is the most important and most exciting for us in the design community. Because what the research suggests is that even when we don't have the ability to bring real forms of nature into a space, simulated forms of nature can facilitate stress relief. So what does that mean for us in the acoustic world? How can we simulate nature to reduce stress, to aid recuperation, to get people back to being at their best? So how do we use acoustics to connect us to the natural world? Well, natural acoustics have connected us to the wider environment throughout human evolution. It's been part of our rich, multi-sensory environments. Think of it as we may have experienced life as cave people, waking up to the dawn chorus, hearing things that might inform us about our sources of food or water, wayfinding, the creation of exciting spaces, relaxation, and maybe even sort of recognizing the sound of crickets to mark the end of the day. So can we use these ideas to better inform us, to connect us to the natural world in our dense, urban, and stressful environments, to help us to reduce stress, to recuperate, to be more productive, to be more creative, and to communicate better with the people around us? Now, this is a project that we recently, we're in process of creating with the Building Research Establishment. And it's based on a white paper that we've recently written, soon to come out in May this year, all about designing for the cognitive and sensory well-being. So this essentially is about designing for neurodiversity. And it's more than just those extremes of autistic spectrum, but it's also about how we design for the general population. And we've looked at sensory profiling, which is more specific than simply classifying people as introvert and extrovert, but it's actually looking at sensory thresholds and how they come into play in the design of spaces. Essentially, it's about our ability to take in or filter out the constant sensory stimuli, be that noise or sound or touch, that we experience at any one point. Now, sensory profiling and the design of spaces is and should be an essential way of thinking about the people in buildings and their ability to filter out distraction. You may think that you're an extrovert who enjoys lively, busy spaces, but the reality is that you may be distracted by those noises. So helping individuals, but also larger organizations understand the wider sensory thresholds will help us better deliver places where people can work. Now that, in this BRE project, has reflected in our desire to create lots of different spaces where people can work in different ways, but also to introduce the visual connection to nature in these large water walls, and also an interactive acoustic system that monitors sound levels throughout the space and then puts cones of noise across that space to mask different noise outputs. So nature-based biophilic acoustics need not necessarily be complicated. It can be as simple as creating no phone zone times, putting on your headphones and listening to natural noises such as the Noisely app. It could be about waking up more gently with a Lumi light clock and the sound of nature and the dawn chorus, to creating positive surface choices, including plants and greenery that offer not just the physiological, but also the psychological benefit of nature. It could be about designing a diversity of spaces when scaled up to include and incorporate the essential consideration of our sensory inputs and our sensory thresholds. Or it might also be about designing with a more considered sense on our walls, floors, and ceilings. Our connection to nature gives us a universal design ethos and the opportunity to create happier and healthier places to live and work. Thank you very much.